Where do I even begin with this game? 7 million sales in only 5 days. Like, goddamn, I knew it was a pretty big meme ever since the reveal trailer from years ago made everyone just laugh at the notion of a game that was so blatantly just Pokemon with guns. But I think a lot of people, including myself, mostly just expected it to come out to very little fanfare. Like, sure, we'd get the usual round of streamer bait content, and all the big influencers would do a few rounds of it to laugh at the idea and all the jank of it all. And then, just as quickly, it would basically just disappear from the public consciousness practically overnight, and by February or March, everyone would have forgotten about its existence. But instead, somehow, it managed to sell millions of copies on the first day alone. And these are Steam numbers specifically. Like, we're not talking about how, like, other companies like to inflate their numbers by including things like Game Pass downloads in their figures. And as far as I can tell, that's also not even counting console sales, because I believe you can also get it on Xbox. So, if anything, the number is even higher than it's being reported. And, I mean, hell, by the time I upload this video, it'll probably cross 8 million sales, and by the time you watch it, it could be well over 10. So just like, what the hell is going on with this game? Like, is Palworld really that good to warrant so many sales? Well, naturally, before I can really talk about the game itself, I think that there are a lot of elephants in the room that I have to address first. It's basically impossible to talk about this game without mentioning the whole AI thing and stolen asset allegations. So I'm going to try and quickly go over those topics first, and if you want to skip over that part of the video, by all means, I'll make sure to include timestamps and chapters in the description down below if you want to just get straight to my review and first impressions, and just talk about the game all overall. So yeah, the three main accusations being made against this game are naturally that, one, they must have clearly plagiarized some of the designs for the PALs after a ton of Pokemon. Two, not only that, but they also may have even stolen a number of assets from actual Pokemon games and simply repurposed them and sort of kitbashed them together into the creatures for this game. And finally, three, the allegations that they have used AI in some capacity as a means of stealing assets and creating the PALs that way. So, to start with the stolen asset allegations, I personally feel like if this were true, we'd be getting a lot more conclusive evidence of it by now. Palworld is on PC, which these days basically means that people can data mine it instantly. And people have already tried to rip the models and compare them to try and prove that they're stolen. But almost none of these attempts have even come close to producing any real fruit, and the few that have even been admitting to faking some of the comparisons and manipulating the data in certain ways to make it look closer than it really is. And I mean, if you look at some of the models for yourself, you can tell pretty easily that they're not literally the same assets. Like, for example, this one comparison I've seen crop up a few times shows Primarina's hair and a PAL that clearly has a hairstyle that was inspired, to say the least, by that design. So, sure, just looking at it, it's very clear that the overall shape is very similar. The same tufts of hair in the same places, the same bulges, and so on and so forth. But when you look at the actual, like, model itself and the polygon flow, the tries just aren't even close. On the Primarina, for example, you can tell that the tries all flow straight towards the center of the middle bulge, whereas on the other model in the same location, they're nowhere near as organized, with them sort of splitting off in different directions and different parts of the model. Same on the lower part of the hair down here. You can clearly see the tries all flowing in the same sort of spiral pattern, whereas in the other model, the spiral is broken up often by tries that go in the other direction. I point this out because this is the kind of difference in the nuance of these models that wouldn't happen if they were simply squished or stretched a bit to try and make it look different. In my opinion, it only makes sense for these kinds of differences to exist if they remodeled it from scratch themselves, even if they did obviously use Primarina as a reference. And I mean, in general, it's worth keeping in mind that we're talking about the Pokemon community here. I remember back when Sword and Shield came out, there were accusations of them using older Pokemon models, despite claiming to have otherwise updated the animations and models and whatnot. And people debunked that shit instantly, like overnight. And that was just having a trailer to go off because the game wasn't even out yet. Meanwhile, this incredibly high profile game, which has been out for a full week already and has already had its models extracted, has yet to reveal any remotely conclusive evidence of stolen assets. I mean, I'll admit, maybe in the future more evidence will come out, and we'll have to see if that happens, but for the time being, I think I'm going to have to assume innocent until proven guilty here. But okay, so maybe they didn't literally steal the assets from the other games directly, but who knows, maybe they used AI to generate the PALs. After all, the CEO has been super vocal of AI in the past, right? So, yeah, like this also gets tossed around a lot, and I'll admit, it's kind of hard to prove or disprove whether somebody actually used AI or maybe did AI with human touch ups and stuff like that. But there's a couple very big reasons why I don't think that they did. For one, Steam currently has a new policy regarding the use of AI assets. Regardless of whether your assets are being generated by AI in real time, or, as people are accusing of Palworld, being generated at some point during the development process and then being added to the game afterwards, in either case, you have to disclose whether you're using AI assets on your Steam page. Now, of course, they haven't done so, and maybe they're lying. But again, if the CEO has been so vocally in support of AI in the past, and they have had no desire to hide their use of AI before in their past projects, then why would they suddenly have this change of heart and 180 to try and keep it under wraps? And I mean, I hope that they're not lying for their own sake, because I mean, I'm pretty sure selling 7 million copies of a game under false pretenses sounds like the kind of thing that might get them in deep trouble with Steam. But I mean, the other piece of evidence that they haven't used AI to create these PALs is simply that the timeline doesn't line up. The first trailer for this game came out in June of 2021, and many of the final designs of the PALs are clearly visible in this much older, like pre-alpha version of the game, which means that they were probably working on the designs for the PALs at least months, if not years, before that point, probably as far back as at the latest early to mid 2020. And that is just way before the internet started to get flooded with all of this AI garbage that we're starting to see today. So I don't really see how the timeline is supposed to line up for them to be able to even use AI to create these PALs in the first place. I mean, it's worth mentioning that I don't think, at least as far as I'm aware, that there's a 3D modeling based AI even on the market yet. Everything is based off of 2D images and text for the most part. But finally, there is of course the plagiarism accusation. Maybe they just did it the old-fashioned way and just plagiarized the designs like you do back in the old days. And I mean, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's pretty obvious that a lot of the designs are very clearly directly taken from Pokemon, like Grass Cinderace over here. But legally speaking, I mean, okay, I'm not a lawyer, but I do know someone who is. That, of course, being Nintendo's lawyers. And surely, if they thought that this game legitimately infringed on their copyright, they could have gone after this game years ago, and wouldn't have had to wait until after it already came out to try and press charges on those allegations. I mean, like, Nintendo is one of the most litigious companies in the world when it comes to protecting their IPs. And for comparison, they shot down that mod that replaced the models of the game with actual Pokemon models pretty much instantly. Though, of course, for the record, apparently that wasn't just some random mod that someone posted for free. It was actually a paid mod that they were actively selling, which means that they were actually, literally profiting off of stolen assets, like many people accuse Palworld of doing. So, to give you an idea of how fast Nintendo could be reacting to this kind of stuff, the fact that Palworld has survived a week without being put to court is practically a lifetime here. And actually, I'm kinda glad that I waited until I did to make this video, because we actually got an official statement from the Pokemon Company in regards to this game. I'll go ahead and put it up on screen if you want to read it yourself, but basically all they're saying is that they're going to investigate it to see if they legitimately actually stole assets from them, since that is a pretty serious allegation, and I have a feeling they were probably getting spammed with messages making that claim just all week. But the way that it's worded clearly shows that they have no actual evidence to back it up right now. They're literally only starting to investigate things. So honestly, I really think that they only put out this statement because so many people were probably messaging them over this whole, like, situation. So yeah, like, at the very least, as it stands right now, Palworld appears to be legally in the clear. Maybe some more definitive evidence will eventually come out in the coming days, weeks, or months, but until that happens, then like I said, I think I'm gonna have to assume innocent until proven guilty here. Now, by all means, if the fact that so many of the pals are so blatantly taking design ideas and cues from Pokemon designs, if that puts a bad taste in your mouth, nobody is forcing you to like it. But I also think that a lot of people aren't really giving them fair credit for some of these designs. Like, a lot of these pals actually have some pretty fun and adorable designs, like, even if they are directly inspired by Pokemon. And some of the comparisons are really kind of unfair that I've seen going around. Like, for example, this hedgehog one is clearly just a hedgehog. Like, it's being compared to Shaman, but, like, Shaman's also just a hedgehog. Like, same with the one that people are comparing to Xerneas. Like, almost nothing about them is remotely similar beyond the fact that they're just both magic deer creatures. Xerneas' horns split off into 4 pairs, whereas the PAL version is shaped more like a proper elk with only 2 horns that split off into multiple ends. They have different patterns on their fur. The PAL one is way fluffier. It has completely different legs. Like, I think this comparison is really unfair to say that it's just a ripoff, in my opinion. But I also think that, kind of ironically, some of the more blatant ripoffs are also some of their more unique designs. Like, take the very obviously Lucario here. There is no doubt in anyone's mind that this is clearly inspired directly by Lucario, right? But ironically, it feels like maybe because it's such a blatant ripoff, that they actually changed a lot more of its design elements to kind of set it apart. Like, Lucario has its own spikes, and this thing doesn't. The PAL has a much more explicit Egyptian pharaoh design, while Lucario doesn't. The details on the ears are completely different. They have different patterns of fur. The arms and legs are completely different. Like, it's this weird paradox where, beyond just the basic concept of a bipedal jackal-style creature, there's actually almost no real similarities in their design. Same with the Braxian ripoff. Again, they're both clearly Fire Witch-themed bipedal foxes, yes, but so many elements of the designs have been actually changed to something completely different that I can't really argue that they really stole anything from the original design beyond the basic concept. Like, yes, they have, like, fluff in their ears, but, like, that's also just a trait of the animal that they're based off of. So, like, I can't even really say that that's a Pokemon thing. And I mean, you know, let's be real here. So much of the gaming landscape is just chock full of people just basically stealing ideas from other people and iterating off of them. I mean, how many people cheer whenever somebody makes a spiritual successor to a wildly beloved but otherwise forgotten franchise? I'm not about to call something like Bug Fables a Paper Mario ripoff, even though it very clearly is explicitly meant to parrot almost everything people liked about those games. And just in general, we still have the issue where entire genres of games are named after explicit examples of earlier games that sort of establish the conventions rather than having their own identity. You got roguelikes, Metroidvania, Soulsborne games, and I mean, hell, for the longest time, first-person shooters were called Doom clones. And that wasn't just due to a lack of vocabulary, it was really because for a while, a ton of these early shooters were literally just copying Doom one-to-one and trying to put, like, their own minor spin on it. And it took until games like Quake and Half-Life came out for them to finally get kind of their own term in first-person shooter. Plus, one thing that I find really funny is that when people point out that the pickaxe animation in Palworld is clearly ripped straight from Fortnite, Like, it just kind of reminds me just how much of a straight up cash grab ripoff game Fortnite is, in my opinion. And that's like one of the biggest games on the market right now. I mean, it originally started as a generic PvE based defense game before pivoting to the Battle Royale genre purely because other games like PUBG started getting popular. And I still remember one of the more blatant examples being when Apex Legends first came out, since that game had three-man squads by default, but they didn't want to force players to use voice chat. So they actually came up with this really cool and robust ping system that was extremely highly praised at the time. But then naturally, all of a sudden, 2 weeks later, Fortnite got an update that basically added the exact same mechanic to their own game. And they do this all the time. Like, any time a game comes out that is remotely popular and compatible with Fortnite's mechanics, it feels like, give it like a month and that game's main features will just end up being subsumed, just like every other popular idea, into the collective that is Fortnite. But yeah, like anyways, to try and wrap up this section of the video and kind of get back on track for my first impressions, I don't really think Palworld is that unique in its blatant stealing of ideas. And honestly, I don't think it's really that bad of a thing, as long as it's not, getting into actual legitimate legal trouble. And there are some legitimately interesting and original spins on the idea, as opposed to it just stealing Pokemon designs just to be a soulless cash grab. And so I guess that means that I should probably actually talk about the game itself now. So hello and welcome to everyone who skipped past the last 14 minutes of the video to get to this point. Although, I will admit, actually, the first thing I want to talk about before I get to the gameplay is the sheer number of difficulty settings in this game. Like, this was completely unexpected to me, and this is something I always love when companies do, because it really lets you customize your experience to your liking with a lot more fine-tuning than a simple, easy, medium, and hard slider does. You can change almost every aspect of the game, from how long days and nights are independently of each other, how much damage you or your pals take and dish out, capture rates, spawn rates, hunger degradation, the list goes on. You can even change the penalty from dying and losing all your items to keeping them, or even enabling a sort of Nuzlocke style mode where you lose your pals on death too. I mean, hell, I think the only thing it's missing is like a hardcore permadeath mode where all of your pals just die for real if they die in combat. It's just so refreshing to see these options when it's so much more than I could say about the actual Pokemon games. And yeah, I'll probably mention Pokemon a few more times in this review because it's frankly unavoidable, but it really is annoying to me how Pokemon just keeps taking away options from its players. Like, that's the interesting thing about the whole EXP share debacle, is that it's an item that does something that I think most people want in almost every RPG. Like, when a game doesn't share your experience between all of your party members, it's usually listed as a negative, but the main reason why I think people like having the option to not use the EXP share is because it's the closest thing the game has to a difficulty option. So removing that option just makes it impossible to customize the game to make it harder without using some kind of external self-imposed challenge. And hell, I'll never forget quite possibly one of the dumbest things I've seen in a game in regards to difficulty, which was the fact that your reward for beating Pokemon White was that you unlocked a New Game Plus mode on an easier difficulty setting, so that I guess if you wanted to play through the whole game again, but make it less challenging, then I guess you could do so. But anyways, to try and get off that tangent and get to the actual gameplay, so, a lot of people were actually surprised that the game was a proper survival crafting style game. I guess, to be fair, most people didn't really look past the inherent hilariousness of Pokemon with guns to see that the actual gameplay in the trailers was shaping up to, be that kind of game. But yeah, I have to say that my first impressions are actually pretty competent. Like, I was surprised at how well put together this game seems to be when I first started playing it. Like, you have all your usual gubbins, you punch trees and rocks to make a crafting table, you build tools so that you can punch in trees, rocks better, and, all that good stuff. But, like, when it gets interesting is the fact that it actually incorporates the survival and base building aspects of the game into the creature collecting surprisingly well. Like, I'll admit, I'm a sucker for base building in games. Like, it's the only reason I was able to enjoy pretty much any of my time playing Fallout 4. Like, that's how much I like building stuff. But even still, I was surprised at just how much time I spent building my base and managing all of my little pals in the game. Like, something I always like in these sorts of games is when they add automation, because it can get really tedious to keep having to harvest wood and stone and whatnot over and over again because I need to craft like another crossbow or whatever. So, some way to take those early parts of the game and start automating them or replacing them with different, more engaging gameplay is always appreciated by me. And this game starts, like, lets you start automating things by like minute 2. See, like, a core part of how this game works is that each of the different pals that you can encounter and capture has a number of skills from a surprisingly large list of options that allows it to perform different tasks while it's at your base. Anything from helping you craft items, to planting seeds, to heating a furnace, and so on and so forth. So, if you want to automate the gathering of rocks and trees, then you just gotta find a pal that has the mining skill or the lumber skill, respectively. And you don't even have to build a base to make use of those skills. Like, they could just help you gather items out in the wild if you throw them at an appropriate resource. But if you build a base somewhere, then you can place them in that base, and then they can gather those items automatically. And then if you have a pal with the transport skill, they can even carry those items and put them into your storage chests automatically for you as well. And of course, all of your crafting tables will automatically pull from any storage in your base, which is always a nice feature in these kinds of games. And like, you can probably start to see why this works so well, because it ties in directly to giving you an incentive to go out and collect more creatures. Like, an early thing to work on to help make your base more self-sufficient is you need to start growing berries, because of course your pals have hunger meters that you need to manage. But if you want to grow berries automatically, then you're going to need a grass pal that can plant the seeds, and a water pal that could water them, and then you need a pal with like actual hands to harvest the crops and store them so that other pals can eat them. And so early on, you almost certainly don't have any of these pals that can fill any of these roles. So you need to go out exploring and try to catch more buddies to bring back to your base. So even if you have no interest in adding a water type to your team, or if you just don't really like a particular pal for your combat, well, now you still might have a reason to go, oh, I need a water type to water my crops, so I'm gonna go catch this random penguin I found and bring him back to my base. And it's worth mentioning that the game isn't just an unethical labor practices simulator either. I mean, it easily can be if you want to go down that road for the memes, but like I said, you have to manage your pals' hunger as well as their sanity. If you don't give them proper beds and give them facilities to relax in like a hot tub, then their sanity will naturally deplete and they get tired and depressed and they don't want to work for you anymore. Even if you want to be an unethical business tycoon, it still reduces their work efficiency, so you gotta provide something to them to try and keep them happy. Like, I know the trailer's really focused on all the unethical shit you can do in this game, but in reality, the game actually punishes you for almost all of that stuff. Like, famously, you can also catch, like, human beings in this game, but if you attempt to, then you will immediately have the cops called on you and you gain a wanted level, and now you gotta either fend them off or escape or die trying. And you know, I guess that leads well into talking about the game's combat systems, and I really think it actually is a pretty interesting system. Unlike most games that try to break into the creature collecting genre, everything in this game happens in real time, so you don't actually control your pals directly, at least not by default. Rather, each pal has 3 active abilities that function essentially as their main attacks that they can have equipped at a time that they then use at their own behest while they've been released. So you still get to decide what those abilities are, and thankfully you can freely swap between any skills that it knows at any time without having to worry about losing an old move forever. But the idea is that you make sure that they have like a decent spread of abilities with different cooldowns and damage types and whatnot, and you balance out everything to have at least some indirect control over how they do their attacks. Though I will admit, I do kind of wish that the attacks when you're in the menus had some more detailed descriptions and maybe some demo videos to make it clear about like what your actual choices are strategically without having to rely so much on trial and error. But in addition to your pal's main attacks, they also have passives and pal abilities. From what I can tell, they can have up to 4 different passives, and these have a huge number of variations, from things like buffing or debuffing their own elemental resistances, to things like increasing the player's damage, speed, or carrying capacity. There's also passives related to the same, base building mechanics from earlier, like ones that modify how much food they need or how fast they do their jobs. But, of course, finally, and most interestingly to me, each PAL has some kind of actual active partner ability that you, as the player, control the activation of on a cooldown. And there's a ton of variety across all the different PALs as to what these are. Some are passives that do things like give you and your PAL lifesteal, while others are big attacks that let your PAL enter a certain mode, or even let you pick them up, like how you can pick up the Firefox PAL and use it as a literal flamethrower. And of course, there are some of them that literally just tell your pal to whip out a gun and start blasting. But overall, I do think that this system has a lot of potential, especially if they want to expand it more in the future. Like, right now, each PAL seemingly can only have one of these partner abilities, but I think that it could be cool if there's another variation between PALs of the same species, where maybe some PALs have one partner ability and others have a different one, even though they're the same type of PAL. Or maybe you could upgrade the powers between different options, like their own mini skill trees. Or hell, maybe if there was some way to like train your pals, maybe something that you could build in your base as an option that could let them gain or lose certain passives so that you can further customize them. I think there's a lot of fun potential here. Though another group of powers that I want to touch on is the fact that there are a wide variety of pals that essentially unlock the ability to be ridden by you so that you can mount them, which lets you directly control not only their movement but also their normal attacks so that you can attack directly, and thus gives you the option to have a lot more control over a specific fight if you want to. And of course, you can use these pals to just traverse the world, or like surf over water, or even fly through the air. But I have to admit that this is one of my bigger criticisms, because while it is fun to go out and fight and collect your pals throughout the world, so far in my experience at least, the actual world exploration and level design feels kinda lacking in my opinion. For one, there's a lot of different random mechanics that allow you to traverse the world, like you can climb like a certain other game, or you can ride mounts, and there's even a grappling hook. But once you get a flying mount, pretty much all of those extraneous mechanics just become redundant, and there doesn't seem to really be any real downsides to just using a flyer to get everywhere. Like, I don't know, maybe they should make those flying pals more rare, or maybe just shift the upgrade that lets you ride them in the tech tree to be way further along so that you can't get it as quickly as I did. Or maybe they could impose some kind of downside, like maybe while you're flying you can only carry half your normal capacity, or something like that. That way there's actually like an incentive to use other pals for like other things. Because like right now, I don't really feel like there's a reason to bother mounting like basically anything but a flying mount, because you could just get everywhere on the map from just that. But I mean, regardless of how you traverse the world, I also feel like the world itself is also kind of lacking as well. There's not really that many interesting places to explore in the first place. Now, again, I will admit I've only been playing the game for about a dozen hours so far, but everything that I've seen has been pretty much grasslands and forests as far as the eye can see. There's just not really a ton of interesting variety in the terrain. Like, the only other biomes that I've encountered so far in my run is that there's a part of the map where there's these yellow forests instead of the green ones, and right next to it, there's red forests. Ooh. Like, I'm pretty sure that these are literally the exact same forest assets, just recolored slightly to add a little bit of variation to the map. But I will admit that, if I actually pull up a view of the actual full map, there does appear to be some other locations that actually have different biomes, like there's a tundra zone and there's a volcano that you can see in the distance, so hopefully I'll eventually get to those parts of the game soon enough, and we'll see how it actually maybe changes up the gameplay, if it even does at all. But it would be nice if there was also like some more variety in the starting areas, because right now I've been playing for quite a while and I've just been seeing grassland as far as the eye can see, and even on this full map, it's pretty clear that a huge portion of this game is just pretty much generic grasslands without a ton of variation as far as I can tell. Then in terms of stuff to actually like fill and populate that map, there are a handful of points of interest just kind of scattered about the world, and I've encountered some stuff, like there's a town with some shops and a few encampments that are housing the, evil bad guy team that you can clear out to get a free pal, and there are some dungeons you can find as well that have bosses in them, but the two that I found so far literally had the exact same map layout with just different bosses in them, so and like otherwise, I haven't really encountered that many actual points of interest throughout my exploration, so I feel like this is kind of a weak point of the game that I really hope to see improve dramatically in the future. Because, yeah, right now it kind of feels like the only real reason to explore the world at all is mostly to just gather pals. Though another criticism I do have down that line of thinking, which, to be fair, they have already listed as one of their top priorities on their new roadmap, is that the PAL AI is pretty weak. Like, they basically have no ability to navigate your custom-built structures. So the space that I built, where all of their beds are on the second floor, is practically inaccessible to them, which I learned when I made my future bases. But I think that the wild pals are the real weak spot with AI, namely that they seemingly don't even really have anything beyond just basic, ability to attack anything that attacks them. I remember this being a big criticism that I had towards Pokemon Legends Arceus, because it made that world feel a lot less alive than it could have. Like, I'll be exploring the world and you come across a cool looking Pokemon or a pal or whatever, but when you actually stop to observe their behavior, they don't really do anything in either of these games outside of just fighting stuff. I'm pretty sure that the sum total of their logic when they're out in the wild is basically just that they spawn and then wander aimlessly within a certain radius, functionally indefinitely, until something else interacts with them. And just like I've said with Legends Arceus, I think that a huge and fairly simple improvement to the game could be to just add a really simple behavior tree to the wild pals. All they really need to do is just assign each pal a place where they get food, a place where they get water, and a place where they sleep. And then if they want, they can sprinkle in a few wandering zones as well. Then at different times of day, they just go to those different places, do a few key animations, and then move on to the next one. And if you throw in some basic behaviors like predator pals trying to automatically attack the more herbivorous pals when they come across them, then that could lead to some cool basic, emergent behaviors. But I think that wouldn't be too complex to implement, and I think that it would make the world feel so much more alive to actually have these creatures wandering around between their daily schedules instead of them just kind of sitting around doing nothing until you come along to capture them. And I mean, to be fair, we are talking about a half-price early access release, and I'm comparing it to Legends Arceus, which was a $60 final release game. And honestly, I'm not gonna lie, I kind of feel like Palworld puts that game to shame, in my opinion. Legends Arceus had a neat idea, and there were some cool updates to the combat and whatnot, but it really came off to me like baby's first open world, and the world design was extremely simplistic, and like I said, there wasn't a lot of interesting Pokemon behaviors. So the fact that Palworld feels comparable at all when it's a half-price early access title, I think says a lot about both games. And I mean, after all, who knows what this game might be like in a year or 2 years, or hell, even longer in the future. Well, I can kind of feel myself starting to ramble, so I think I'll cut it off here for now for my first impressions of the game. I think that while there are definitely plenty of spots that are have plenty of jank to go around, and there are a lot of flaws that I can point out, there's also a surprisingly well implemented and well thought out gameplay loop that has been pretty addicting over the last few days, and I think I'm starting to really understand why this game has really taken off the way it does beyond, the obvious shock value of just giving Pokemon guns. And I think that there's a lot of potential improvement that could be made throughout the early access period. And I think I might do some deeper analysis videos, more specifically on why I think things like the base building works so well in this game. So if you want to see that get made, then make sure to leave me a like and hit that subscribe button so that you can get notified of when I make more videos like this one in the future. But for now, I want to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.